Men left that job with money in their pockets and nothing in their eyes. Elijah Brooks heard the sentence twice before he even reached the front desk, once from a man in a pressed suit who laughed like it was a joke, and once from a woman checking her phone who didn't laugh at all, and somehow the second one stayed with him longer. The way silence tends to outlive noise, and Elijah didn't respond, didn't ask questions, didn't turn around. He just kept walking across the polished marble floor of Whitmore Tower, boots clean but worn at the edges, shoulders straight. Breath steady, because turning back wasn't an option anymore, not with rent due in 4 days and a small inhaler sitting on the kitchen counter at home with just enough left for maybe 2 nights if his daughter used it carefully, and she always used it carefully. More than a kid her age should have to, which was exactly why he couldn't afford to hesitate now. Not here, not today, not for a job that everyone else seemed so eager to warn him about, but not eager enough to take themselves. The lobby felt too quiet for a place this expensive, like even sound had rules here, and somewhere above, behind glass and steel and decisions that moved numbers most people would never see, was Claire Whitmore, the woman who owned the building, the company. And apparently, the reason no driver lasted more than a week. Elijah reached the desk and gave his name, voice low, respectful, not submissive, just clear. The receptionist glanced at her screen, then at him, a quick flicker of something in her eyes, not judgment exactly, more like recognition, as if she had seen this before, men walking in with calm faces and leaving with something missing. "She's expecting you," she said, and that was it. No smile, no warning. Just a quiet confirmation that he had stepped into something already in motion. The elevator ride up felt longer than it should have, not because of the height, but because of the stillness, his reflection in the mirrored wall looking back at him older than he felt. More tired than he admitted, but steady, always steady. That was something life had taught him early. When things got uncertain, you didn't get louder, you got still. The doors opened without a sound, and the hallway beyond was even quieter than the lobby. Soft carpet swallowing footsteps, walls lined with art that looked expensive without trying too hard, and at the far end, a door slightly ajar. Not inviting, not closed, just waiting. Elijah walked toward it, each step measured, not slow, not rushed, just deliberate, and as he reached the door, he paused for half a second, not out of fear, but out of awareness, because whatever was on the other side of that threshold had already taken something from other men, something they hadn't been able to hold on to, and yet here he was, about to offer the same thing they had, his time, his patience, his presence. Except Elijah wasn't walking in empty. He carried something they might not have, something quiet and stubborn and rooted deep, the kind of thing that doesn't show up on a resume. He knocked once, firm but not loud, and pushed the door open, stepping into a room where the air itself seemed to pause and measure him before anything else could. Claire Whitmore did not stand when he entered. She did not gesture for him to sit. She did not even look at him right away. She simply finished the line she was reading on the tablet in her hand as if time belonged entirely to her and everyone else was expected to wait inside it, and Elijah did, not shifting his weight, not clearing his throat, not announcing himself twice. Just standing there with the same quiet steadiness he had carried through the lobby, until finally she set the tablet down with a soft, controlled motion and lifted her eyes to meet his, sharp, assessing, not hostile, not welcoming, just precise, as if she were measuring something that could not be written down. "Elijah Brooks," she said, not a question. More like a confirmation she had already verified, and he nodded once, "Yes, ma'am," his voice even, respectful without bending, and she studied him for a moment longer than most people could hold eye contact. But Elijah did not look away, not in defiance, not in challenge, simply because he had learned long ago that looking away too quickly could cost you more than holding your ground, and something in that stillness passed between them, not agreement, not trust, just acknowledgement. "You have driven professionally for 3 years, she continued, glancing briefly at the file. "No accidents, no violations. No gaps in employment that you could not explain." She closed the folder without breaking rhythm. That is not what I am hiring for. Elijah did not answer, because she had not asked a question, and Claire seemed to notice that. A flicker of something almost like approval crossing her face before it disappeared. This position requires precision, she said, not just behind the wheel, but in presence, in timing, in silence. She stepped around the desk then, heels quiet against the floor, stopping a few feet in front of him. Close enough to study details, not close enough to invade space. You will not speak unless I ask you to speak. You will not offer opinions. You will not anticipate what has not been requested. Her tone never rose, but the weight of it settled into the room. You will be on time, which means you will be early, and you will not make me wait. Not once. Elijah listened without interrupting, each word landing where it needed to, not as pressure, but as information. Can you do that? She asked finally, and this time it was a question, simple, direct, but layered in a way that had nothing to do with driving. Elijah held her gaze for a second, just long enough to understand what she was really asking, then answered, "Yes, ma'am, I can do the job, not I can follow orders, not I can obey, just the job." And Claire's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in interest. "That is not what I asked," she said, softer now, almost conversational. "I did not ask if you could do the job. I asked if you could function inside it." The room seemed to tighten for a moment, as if even the air was waiting to see how he would respond, and Elijah did not rush it. He did not fill the silence with unnecessary words. He let it settle, then said, "I do not disappear when things get difficult," and for the first time since he walked in, Claire Whitmore paused, not visibly, not in a way most people would notice, but something in her posture shifted. Just slightly, as if that answer had reached a place her rules were not designed to control. She turned away then, breaking eye contact, walking back toward the desk. "Report at 5 in the morning," she said, picking up the tablet again, her voice returning to its measured edge. "Do not be late." Elijah nodded once more. "I will not." And as he turned to leave, her voice followed him, quieter, almost like a thought spoken out loud. Most people say that. He stopped at the door, just for a fraction of a second, not turning around, not replying, and then he walked out, because some answers did not need to be spoken. They needed to be lived. Elijah Brooks arrived at 4:42 in the morning, not because the instruction required it, but because experience had taught him that arriving early was not about time. It was about margin. And margin was the only thing that kept small mistakes from becoming permanent ones. The garage beneath Whitmore Tower was colder than the street above, the kind of cold that settled into concrete and stayed there, rows of black vehicles lined in perfect symmetry, each one polished to a level that reflected not just light but expectation. Elijah walked past them slowly, not admiring, not intimidated, just taking in details the way he always did when stepping into a new environment, the spacing between cars, the placement of keys, the absence of clutter. Everything here was controlled, intentional, nothing left to chance. A man in a tailored coat stood near the far column, clipboard in hand, eyes already on Elijah before he spoke. "You are early," he said, not as praise, more like a notation. Elijah nodded once. "Yes, sir." The man checked his watch anyway, as if confirming something already known, then gestured toward a sleek black sedan at the end of the row. "That one is yours," he said. "Full tank, detailed last night. No personal adjustments without approval." Elijah stepped closer to the vehicle, running his eyes along the surface, not touching yet, just observing, the kind of car that did not belong to the driver, only passed through him, like everything else in this job. He opened the door with care, not slow, not rushed, just precise. The interior smelled faintly of leather and something neutral, no personal scent, no trace of ownership, just a space designed to carry someone who did not want to be felt. Elijah adjusted the seat slightly, memorized the mirror angles, checked the dashboard without turning the ignition, learning before acting, always learning first. At exactly 4:58, he stepped out and closed the door quietly, standing beside the car with hands relaxed, not in his pockets, not clasped, just present. At 5 on the dot, The elevator doors at the far end of the garage opened and Claire Whitmore stepped out, not hurried, not slow, simply moving at a pace that did not adjust for anyone else. She wore a charcoal coat, tailored clean. Hair pulled back with no distraction, a phone in one hand already lit with incoming messages. She did not look at Elijah immediately, did not acknowledge him the way most employers would on a first day. She walked straight toward the car, and only when she reached the rear door did she pause, not to greet him, but to observe something: the angle of the vehicle, the position of his stance, the absence of unnecessary movement. Then she opened the door herself and slid inside without a word. Elijah did not react, did not rush to correct what some might consider a missed courtesy, because nothing in her behavior suggested she expected it, and expectation was the only rule that mattered here. He moved to the driver's seat, started the engine with a smooth turn, no hesitation, no excess motion, and waited half a second, just enough to confirm she was settled. "Where to?" he asked, voice low, controlled, not breaking the silence more than necessary. There was a brief pause behind him, then her voice came, already focused elsewhere. "East 54th, then Midtown. I will update as we go." Elijah nodded once, though she could not see it, and eased the car forward, merging into the early morning streets where the city was still deciding whether to wake or stay quiet. Traffic was light, signals predictable, the kind of drive that revealed more about rhythm than skill, and Elijah followed that rhythm, not forcing speed, not lagging behind, just aligning with the flow of a city that did not care who you were, only how you moved through it. In the rearview mirror, Claire's reflection appeared for a moment, eyes scanning her screen, expression unreadable, but there was something else there, something small. Not quite tension, not quite fatigue, just a flicker of weight that did not belong to someone who controlled everything, and Elijah did not stare, did not analyze too long. He simply noticed, then returned his focus to the road. Because some things were not meant to be understood yet, only witnessed, and in the quiet between engine hum and distant traffic, the job began to show its shape, not through instructions, but through what it demanded without saying a word. By the time the city fully woke, Elijah had already driven Claire through 3 stops that did not feel like stops at all, but transitions, one building to the next, one conversation to another, one decision layered on top of 10 others that never seemed to end. The kind of morning where minutes did not pass, they stacked, and through it all, the car remained the only constant, a controlled space moving through an uncontrollable world, and Elijah treated it that way. Not as a vehicle, but as a boundary, a place where nothing unnecessary entered and nothing important was disrupted. Claire spoke often, but never to him, her voice low and precise as she moved between calls, numbers, names, negotiations that sounded sharp even without context. And yet there were moments, small enough to miss if you were not paying attention, where her voice paused half a second too long before answering, where her fingers hovered over the screen before making a choice, and Elijah noticed, not because he was listening for content, but because he was trained to read rhythm, and her rhythm was not steady, not beneath the surface. At a red light on Lexington, she ended a call without saying goodbye. The silence that followed heavier than the conversation that came before, and for a brief moment, the reflection in the rearview mirror showed something different. Not control, not command, just a flicker of something tired, something human, and then it was gone. Replaced by the same composed stillness she carried like armor. "Take Park Avenue instead," she said, already moving on, and Elijah adjusted without question, not correcting, not suggesting alternatives, just shifting direction with the same calm precision he had maintained all morning, because this job was not about being right, it was about being aligned, and alignment required letting go of the need to be seen. The car moved smoothly through traffic, the engine barely audible, and inside, the silence returned, not empty, but full of everything that was not said. A few minutes later, her phone rang again, a different tone this time, and she hesitated before answering, just a fraction, but enough to register. "Yes," she said, her voice tighter now. Controlled but edged with something else, something that did not belong to boardrooms or contracts. Elijah did not look up, did not shift his posture, but the space inside the car changed. Not louder, not chaotic, just heavier, like the air had thickened around a conversation he was not meant to hear, but could not ignore entirely. "I said I would handle it," she continued, quieter now, each word measured, and then silence again, longer this time, followed by a breath she did not fully release. "No, I do not need help," she added, and something in the way she said it sounded less like confidence and more like refusal. The call ended abruptly, and for the first time since the morning began, she leaned back into the seat, not fully, just enough to let the weight settle for a second. Elijah kept his eyes on the road, but he adjusted the temperature slightly, lowering it by a few degrees without asking, not to fix anything, just to create space. And he slowed the car just enough to smooth the next turn, removing any sharp movement from the moment. Small things, invisible things, the kind that did not announce themselves, but mattered. Claire did not comment, did not acknowledge the change. But she did not pick up her phone right away either. Instead, she looked out the window for a brief second, the city passing by in reflections that did not hold her, and when she finally spoke again, it was not to continue a call, not to give another instruction, but a simple question, quiet, almost absent of intent. "Do you always drive like this?" Elijah did not rush the answer, did not turn around, just said, "Like what?" And there was a pause, a small one, but real. "Like nothing is chasing you," she replied, and Elijah considered that for a moment, the words settling into a place that understood them without needing to explain. "Most things are," he said, calm, steady, "but not everything needs to feel like it." The silence that followed was different, not heavy, not empty, just still, and in that stillness, something shifted, not visibly, not completely, but enough to suggest that this job was already giving something back, not in money, not in position, but in moments where someone who had everything still needed space to breathe, and someone who had almost nothing knew how to create it. The afternoon did not slow down, it shifted, and Elijah felt it the moment the car pulled to the curb outside a glass building that reflected too much sky and not enough ground, the kind of place where decisions were made behind smiles that did not reach the eyes. Claire stepped out without waiting for the door, her pace unchanged, her focus already ahead of her, and Elijah remained in the driver's seat, engine idling, hands steady on the wheel, because this part of the job required patience. More than motion, minutes passed, then more, the city moving around him in layers of sound and distance, horns in the background, footsteps close and then gone, and through it all, the car stayed quiet, contained, like a held breath that did not need to be released. Elijah used the time the way he always did, not for distraction, but for awareness, checking mirrors, noting patterns, adjusting nothing unless necessary, because control in this job was not about doing more, it was about not doing what was not needed. His phone rested in the console, screen dark, but he knew the time without looking, knew that Nia would be out of school in less than an hour, that she would wait by the window like she always did, counting cars that did not belong to them, imagining one that might, and he let that image sit in the back of his mind without letting it pull him away from the present, because being split between two worlds was something he had learned to manage without showing it. The building doors opened and Claire returned, not rushed, but not the same as when she left. Something in her posture tighter, her steps more precise, like she was holding something in place that did not want to stay there. She entered the car without a word, the door closing with a softer sound than expected, and for a moment, she did not give a direction. She simply sat there, looking forward but not at anything, and Elijah did not speak, did not prompt. He just waited, because silence, when used correctly, was not empty, it was permission. "Drive," she said finally, her voice lower than before, and he did, easing back into traffic with the same measured control, not asking where, not needing to yet, because sometimes people needed movement before they could decide direction. A few blocks passed before she spoke again. Take the long way to Midtown, and that was enough. Elijah adjusted the route without hesitation, choosing streets that flowed instead of those that rushed, creating space where the city usually compressed it, and behind him, Claire leaned back slightly. Her phone still in her hand but no longer active. The screen dimmed, forgotten for the moment. The car moved through a quieter stretch, tree-lined, the kind of street that softened sound, and Elijah reduced speed just enough to match it, not to delay, but to align, because pace was not always about time. Sometimes it was about breathing, and in the rearview mirror, he saw it again, that brief unguarded moment, her eyes not scanning, not calculating, just resting, and then something shifted. Her gaze catching on the dashboard, on a small object near the edge, something he had not meant to leave visible, a thin blue hair tie looped around the base of the gear shift, worn, simple, out of place in a car this precise. She reached forward. Slightly, not touching it, just looking. That yours? She asked, and Elijah followed her gaze for a second before answering. My daughter's, his voice unchanged, not explaining more than necessary. Claire's expression did not soften in any obvious way, but she did not look away immediately either. She forgets it in the car sometimes, he added after a beat, not to fill silence, just to place context where it belonged. Claire leaned back again. The smallest shift in her posture, almost imperceptible, but real. How old? She asked, and Elijah answered, 7, and that was all. No elaboration, no story. Just a number that carried more weight than it sounded like. The car continued. Forward, steady, unhurried, and for a moment, the distance between driver and passenger felt less like a rule and more like a choice. Not closed, not open, just slightly changed, and Claire turned her head toward the window again. But this time, she was not looking past the city. She was looking through something else, something quieter, something that did not belong to contracts or control, and Elijah kept driving, because some conversations did not need to be continued, they needed to be held. Gently, without pressure, until they decided what they wanted to become. The sun had already started to lean toward the edges of the buildings by the time the car slowed near Midtown again, not because the day was ending, but because something in Claire's schedule had shifted without being spoken, and Elijah felt it before she confirmed it. The way he had begun to feel most things in this job, through rhythm rather than instruction. Pull over here, she said quietly, and he did, easing the car into a clean stop along a quieter block where the noise of the city softened into something more distant, not gone, just less demanding. Claire did not reach for the door immediately. She remained seated, her phone still resting in her hand but untouched, her gaze forward, not fixed on anything specific, and Elijah stayed still. Engine running low, hands relaxed, not turning, not prompting, just holding the space the way he had learned to do, because sometimes stopping was not about arrival, it was about pause. A few seconds passed, then more, and the silence between them was no longer unfamiliar. It had weight now, but not pressure, more like something settling into place. Do you ever miss it? She asked suddenly, her voice low, almost as if the question had slipped out before she decided to keep it. Elijah did not answer immediately, not because he did not understand, but because he knew better than to respond before the question finished revealing itself. Miss what? He said calmly, and she exhaled slightly, not frustration, just a quiet acknowledgement that she had to define something she usually kept buried. Having more than one thing to think about, she said, eyes still forward. Not just work, not just responsibility, but something that is not measured, not tracked, not expected. Her words slowed toward the end, as if she was hearing them the same moment he was. Elijah let that sit for a second, long enough to respect it, then said, I do not think I ever had that, his voice steady, not heavy, just honest, and for the first time, Claire turned her head slightly, not fully toward him, just enough to shift the angle of her attention. Everyone has something, she replied, softer now, and Elijah nodded once, though she could not see it clearly. I have my daughter, he said, simple, direct, and that was enough to change the air again. Claire looked down at her hands for a moment, the smallest pause, then back out the window. "Does it feel different?" she asked. "When you are with her?" Elijah considered that, not searching for the right words, just letting the truth come as it was. "It feels quieter," he said, "even when it is not," and something in that answer stayed in the car longer than the sound of it. Claire did not respond right away. She leaned back slightly, her posture loosening in a way that did not match the rest of her day, and for a brief moment, she closed her eyes, not fully, just enough to rest them. As if the idea of quiet was something she had not experienced in a long time, Elijah did not move, did not adjust anything. He simply let the moment exist, because this was not part of the job description, but it was part of the work, the part no one wrote down, the part that could not be measured in schedules or payments, the part that gave something back without announcing it. After a few seconds, Claire opened her eyes again, the same composure returning, but not as sharp as before, more settled, more grounded. "We should go," she said, her voice returning to its usual control, but without the edge it carried earlier. Elijah nodded once, shifted the car smoothly back into motion. And as they pulled away from the curb, the city resumed around them, louder now, faster, demanding attention again. But inside the car, something had changed, not in a way that could be pointed to, not in a way that needed explanation, just enough to suggest that the distance between them was no longer fixed, that the space he held was not just functional, it was meaningful, and for the first time since he stepped into this role, Elijah understood that what this job asked from him was not just precision or silence, it was presence, and what it offered in return was something most people did not realize they had lost until they felt it again, even if only for a moment. The evening came in slowly, not with a clear ending but with a gradual shift in the light that stretched across the dashboard and softened the edges of everything it touched, and Elijah noticed it the way he noticed most things, without needing to turn his head, without needing to name it, just a quiet awareness that the day had moved into something else. Claire had not added another stop in over 20 minutes, which in itself was unusual, and when her phone vibrated this time, she did not reach for it right away. She let it ring once, then again, before finally picking it up, her voice returning to its controlled cadence, but with something beneath it that did not fully hide. "Reschedule it," she said, cutting through the conversation on the other end before it could begin. "No, not tomorrow. Next week." A pause, then softer, "I am done for today." The call ended, and for a moment, the car carried a silence that felt earned rather than imposed. Elijah kept his pace steady, not slowing, not rushing, just maintaining the line he had chosen, because consistency in moments like this mattered more than any adjustment. "Where to?" he asked after a few seconds, and this time, the answer did not come immediately. Claire looked out the window again. But not at the buildings, not at the traffic, more like she was searching for something that did not exist outside the glass. "Take me somewhere quiet," she said finally, and Elijah nodded once, already turning onto a route that moved away from the density of Midtown, away from the constant pull of people and sound, toward a stretch of road that bordered the river, where the city opened just enough to breathe. The traffic thinned, the noise softened, and the sky stretched wider between the buildings, the kind of place that did not demand attention, just allowed it to settle. Elijah slowed the car naturally as the road curved along the water, not dramatically, just enough to match the environment, because speed, like everything else, had to belong to the moment. Claire shifted slightly in the back seat, not restless, just adjusting into the space, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, not weaker, not uncertain, just less guarded. "Do you ever feel like you are always one step behind your own life?" she asked, the question landing in the car without urgency, without expectation. Elijah did not answer immediately, not because he did not understand, but because he respected the weight of what she had just placed between them. He let the road carry them forward another few seconds before speaking. "Sometimes it feels like that," he said, "but it is usually because everything else is moving too fast." Claire let out a small breath, not quite a laugh, not quite agreement, Just a release. Or because you are trying to hold too much at once, she added, almost to herself. Elijah considered that, eyes still on the road, hands steady. Things do not fall when you hold them right, he said quietly. They just get heavier. And that seemed to settle somewhere deeper than the conversation itself. Claire leaned her head back slightly, looking up at the ceiling for a moment as if the answer had shifted something she had not been able to move on her own. The car continued along the river, the reflection of the water catching the last light of the day, and for the first time, Claire did not reach for her phone again. She let it rest beside her, forgotten, and in that small choice, Elijah saw it clearly, not a change in who she was, but a change in what she allowed herself to feel, even if only for a moment. Stop here, she said softly as they reached a quiet overlook, and Elijah pulled the car to the side, engines still running. The world outside calm in a way the city rarely offered. Claire did not open the door. She just sat there, looking out at the water, her reflection faint in the glass, and Elijah remained where he was, not turning, not speaking. Just present, because this was the part no one trained you for, the part where silence was not emptiness, but something shared, and as the last light faded into the horizon, it became clear that whatever this job had taken from others, it was not taking from him in the same way. It was asking something different, something quieter, and in return, it was giving him something just as quiet back, a space where being steady mattered, where presence had weight, and where even someone who carried everything could, for a few minutes, set it down without fear of losing it. The car remained still by the river longer than either of them expected, not because time had stopped, but because neither of them moved to restart it, the engine humming low beneath them like a quiet reminder that they could leave at any moment, and yet they did not. Claire's reflection in the window softened by the fading light, her posture no longer rigid, not fully relaxed, just no longer holding itself together as tightly as before, and Elijah stayed where he was, hands resting lightly on the wheel, eyes forward, not watching her directly but aware of every shift in the air behind him, because presence, he had learned, was not about looking, it was about holding space without needing to fill it. After a while, Claire reached for the door handle. Not quickly, not decisively, just enough to test the motion. Then she stopped, her hand resting there as if the simple act of stepping out required more than she had planned for. Do you ever get used to it? She asked quietly, her voice carrying a different weight now, less guarded, more honest. Elijah did not need to ask what she meant. Some questions did not need clarification. They carried their own context. You get used to parts of it, he said, his tone steady, not offering more than necessary, but the important things, you do not want to get used to those. There was a pause, longer this time, and Claire let her hand fall away from the door, leaning back into the seat again, her gaze shifting from the window to the front, to the space just beyond Elijah's shoulder. I think I did, she said, almost under her breath, and for the first time, there was no effort to correct it, no attempt to cover the admission with something sharper. Elijah did not respond right away, because not every truth needed an answer. Some needed room to settle, and the silence that followed was not empty, it was reflective. The kind that allowed something to be seen clearly for the first time. A few moments later, Claire reached forward again, this time not for the door, but for the small blue hair tie near the console. She did not take it, just touched it lightly with her fingers, as if confirming it was real, something simple, something not tied to expectation or performance. Does she wait for you? She asked, and Elijah nodded once. Every day, he said, by the window. Claire's hand lingered there for a second longer before pulling back, her eyes lowering slightly as if that image had landed somewhere deeper than she expected. No one waits for me, she said, not bitter, not dramatic, just factual. And that fact carried more weight than anything she had said all day. Elijah let that sit for a moment, then answered in the same quiet tone, someone will, if you let them. Claire did not look up immediately, but something in her posture shifted again, not fully, not completely. Just enough to suggest that the idea had reached her, even if she was not ready to hold it yet. the city lights began to appear across the water, small reflections breaking the surface into fragments of gold and white, and Claire finally straightened, her composure returning, but not as sharp as before, more grounded, more human. "We should head back," she said, and Elijah nodded, easing the car back into motion with the same smooth control he had maintained all day, the road leading them away from the quiet stretch and back toward the structure of the city. But something remained, something that did not disappear with movement, something carried in the silence between them, and as they drove, Claire did not reach for her phone again. She simply sat there, looking ahead, not at the destination, but at the space between where she had been and where she might be going, and Elijah kept driving, steady, present, understanding now that this job was not just about taking her from one place to another. It was about holding a moment long enough for something inside her to shift, even if neither of them spoke it out loud. The car returned to Whitmore Tower just as the city settled into its evening rhythm, lights glowing in rows that looked steady from a distance, but flickered up close. And Elijah guided the vehicle into the underground garage with the same quiet precision he had carried all day, not because the job required it at this hour, but because consistency was not something you turned off when the schedule ended. It was something you carried through every movement. Claire did not speak as they descended. Her reflection faint in the glass, no longer sharp, no longer distant, just present in a way that had not been there that morning, and when the car came to a stop, the engine idling softly beneath them, she did not reach for the door immediately. She remained seated for a moment, her hand resting near her phone but not touching it, as if the habit of reaching for it had finally loosened its hold. Elijah stayed still, waiting without urgency, because the end of a day like this was not marked by a clock. It was marked by whatever needed to be set down before stepping out. After a few seconds, Claire spoke, her voice measured, but without the edge it once carried. "You will be here tomorrow." It was not quite a question, not quite an order. Something in between. Elijah answered the same way he had all day, steady, without embellishment, "Yes, ma'am," and for a brief moment, she looked at him through the reflection in the rearview mirror, not directly, but enough to acknowledge that he was there, not just as a driver, but as something she had not expected to find in this role. She nodded once, a small motion, almost private, then opened the door and stepped out into the controlled quiet of the garage, her heels soft against the concrete, not echoing the way they might have hours earlier. As if even the sound of them had adjusted, Elijah watched only long enough to ensure she cleared the vehicle safely, then turned the engine off. The silence that followed deeper now, not empty, but full of everything the day had carried. He sat there for a moment, hands still resting lightly on the wheel, letting it settle, not replaying conversations, not analyzing moments, just allowing the weight of it to pass through without holding on to it. Because that was the difference, he realized, between what this job took from others and what it gave him. They had tried to carry it all, every demand, every silence, every unspoken expectation, until there was nothing left to hold themselves with, but Elijah did not carry it that way. He let it move through, kept only what mattered, the steady rhythm, the quiet presence, the moments that did not ask for more than he could give. He stepped out of the car, closing the door with the same care he had used all day, and for a second, he looked at the vehicle, not as something he owned, but as something he had guided, a space that had held more than just movement, a place where something small but real had shifted, upstairs, unseen behind layers of glass and steel. Claire Whitmore walked back into a life that demanded everything from her, but tonight, something was different, not in what she faced, but in how she carried it. The weight had not disappeared, but it had changed shape, softened at the edges, made room for something she had not allowed in a long time. And Elijah, walking back toward the exit of the garage, already thinking about the small apartment waiting for him, the light in the window, the quiet footsteps of a 7-year-old who would run to the door without needing to ask if he would come home, understood it in his own way. This job had not given him more money than he expected, not yet. It had not made his life easier, not yet, but it had given him something back that he had almost forgotten he still had, the ability to stand in the middle of someone else's storm and not lose himself in it, the ability to offer steadiness without needing recognition, and the ability to walk away at the end of the day with something still intact inside him, something that no contract